Identity and Access Management Lifecycle is about managing identity from creation to retirement across systems, and it is one of the most operationally demanding areas of security. Identities are not static objects. They represent people, services, and devices that change roles, responsibilities, and relevance over time. If identity lifecycle is not managed deliberately, access slowly drifts away from business reality, leaving behind orphaned accounts, excessive privileges, and unclear ownership. Lifecycle management connects human processes like hiring and role changes to technical controls like authentication and authorization, which means it must operate reliably at scale. The purpose is to ensure that access reflects current need rather than historical accident, and that identity remains a trustworthy control point rather than a persistent source of risk. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to the CISS books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Joiner processes are the starting point of the lifecycle, creating accounts, assigning roles, and establishing baseline access for new users. This phase often happens under time pressure because new hires need to be productive quickly, which creates temptation to grant broad access temporarily. From a security perspective, joiner processes should be standardized and policy-driven so that access is predictable and aligned with role definitions rather than individual judgment. Baseline access should reflect least privilege for the job function, with additional access granted only when justified. Automation is especially valuable here because it reduces manual errors and ensures consistency across systems. A well-designed joiner process balances speed and control, delivering timely access without planting the seeds of future privilege creep. Mover processes address what happens when a user changes jobs, transfers departments, or takes on new responsibilities, which is where many identity programs struggle. Changes are often incremental and informal, with access added to support new duties, while old access is left in place just in case. Over time, this accumulation creates users whose access reflects their entire career rather than their current role. Effective mover processes ensure that access is reassessed when roles change, adding what is newly required while removing what is no longer justified. This requires coordination between human resources, managers, and identity systems so that role changes trigger access reviews rather than silent expansion. Without disciplined mover processes, even strong joiner and leaver controls will fail to preserve least privilege. Leaver processes are critical because they disable accounts and remove access promptly when a user leaves the organization or no longer requires access. Delays in deprovisioning create windows of exposure where former employees or contractors retain access they should not have. These windows are attractive to attackers because credentials may still work even after trust has ended. Effective leaver processes rely on authoritative signals, such as termination events, to trigger immediate action across identity systems. They also account for non-human access, such as shared credentials or delegated privileges that may persist beyond the individual. When leaver processes are reliable and timely, they close one of the most common and easily exploited gaps in access control. Provisioning is the mechanism that assigns access based on role, policy, and approvals, translating governance decisions into technical reality. Provisioning can involve creating accounts, assigning group memberships, issuing credentials, and configuring application-specific entitlements. The challenge is ensuring that provisioning reflects policy rather than convenience, especially when multiple systems and approval paths are involved. Automated provisioning, driven by identity attributes, helps maintain consistency and reduces manual intervention, which lowers error rates. Approval workflows add accountability, ensuring that access grants are intentional and reviewable. When provisioning is well designed, it becomes a controlled pipeline rather than an ad hoc collection of scripts and manual steps. Deprovisioning is the counterpart to provisioning and must remove access across applications, devices, and cloud services when it is no longer needed. This includes disabling accounts, revoking tokens, removing group memberships, and reclaiming licenses or resources. Deprovisioning is often more complex than provisioning because access may be scattered across many systems with different interfaces and dependencies. Partial deprovisioning creates false confidence, where an identity appears disabled in one system but remains active elsewhere. Strong deprovisioning requires comprehensive system coverage and regular validation to ensure that access removal actually occurred. When deprovisioning works reliably, it prevents orphaned access from lingering unnoticed. Identity repositories play a central role by storing attributes and unique identifiers that allow correlation across systems. These repositories act as the source of truth for identity data, providing consistent identifiers that applications and infrastructure can rely on. Attributes such as department, role, employment status, and manager are used to drive provisioning decisions and policy enforcement. If repository data is inaccurate or inconsistent, access decisions will reflect those errors, amplifying their impact. Maintaining data quality, therefore, becomes a security requirement, not just an administrative task. A well-managed identity repository enables automation, traceability, and reliable lifecycle control across the environment. Governance defines who approves access and how exceptions are handled, providing the decision framework that guides lifecycle operations. Without governance, provisioning and deprovisioning become technical exercises disconnected from business accountability. Governance establishes roles and responsibilities, ensuring that access decisions are made by appropriate owners who understand the risk and necessity of the access. It also defines how exceptions are requested, documented, and reviewed, preventing informal bypasses from becoming permanent vulnerabilities. Clear governance makes access decisions defensible and auditable, which is essential in regulated and high-risk environments. When governance is explicit, lifecycle processes operate with purpose rather than habit. Segregation of duties is a key governance principle that reduces risk from concentrated access rights by ensuring that critical functions are not controlled by a single identity. For example, the same user should not both approve access and implement it, or both develop and deploy sensitive changes. Segregation of duties limits the damage that can occur if an account is compromised or misused, because no single identity can complete an entire abuse chain alone. Implementing segregation of duties requires understanding business processes and mapping them to access controls. It also requires tooling that can detect and prevent conflicting entitlements from being assigned inadvertently. When enforced consistently, segregation of duties adds structural resilience to identity systems. Recertification reviews are periodic checks that confirm users still need the privileges they possess, serving as a corrective mechanism for lifecycle drift. These reviews compare current access against current access, policy, role definitions, and actual job responsibilities. Managers and resource owners are asked to attest that access is appropriate, forcing explicit reconsideration rather than passive acceptance. Recertification helps identify excess privileges, outdated entitlements, and misassigned roles that automated processes may not catch. Although reviews can be resource-intensive, they are one of the few controls that systematically surface privilege creep. When performed regularly and taken seriously, recertification aligns access state with current reality. Audit trails capture approvals, changes, and administrative actions over time, providing evidence that lifecycle and governance processes are functioning as intended. These trails record who approved access, when changes were made, and which systems were affected, creating accountability for decisions. Audit data is essential for investigations, compliance assessments, and post-incident analysis because it allows reconstruction of access history. Without reliable audit trails, organizations are forced to rely on inference and memory, which undermines confidence in controls. Strong auditability also discourages careless or unauthorized changes because actions are visible and attributable. In mature programs, audit trails are treated as core security data rather than incidental logs. Service accounts require special attention because they are often powerful, long-lived, and poorly governed compared to human identities. These accounts are used by applications, scripts, and integrations, and they frequently bypass interactive authentication controls. Each service account should have a clear owner, a documented purpose, and a defined lifecycle, including rotation and decommissioning. Without ownership and governance, service accounts become invisible attack paths that persist long after their original use has faded. Controlling service accounts requires applying the same lifecycle thinking used for human identities, adapted to technical realities. When service accounts are managed deliberately, they stop being blind spots in the access landscape. Federation and single sign-on change lifecycle needs by centralizing authentication events and reducing the number of credentials users must manage. With federation, identities are authenticated by a central provider, and access to downstream services is based on trusted assertions rather than local credentials. This centralization simplifies joiner, mover, and leaver processes because disabling an identity in one place can effectively cut off access to many services. It also shifts risk toward the identity provider, making its security and availability critical. Lifecycle governance must therefore extend to federated relationships, ensuring that trust is established, monitored, and revoked appropriately. When federation is governed well, it strengthens lifecycle control rather than weakening it. Identity and access management governance ensures that access remains appropriate as roles evolve, systems change, and people move through the organization. Lifecycle processes translate human events into technical actions, while governance defines how those actions are approved, reviewed, and audited. Joiner, mover, and leaver controls prevent access from drifting away from business reality. And provisioning and deprovisioning enforce those decisions consistently across systems. Identity repositories, segregation of duties, and recertification reviews provide structure and oversight that catch errors and abuse before they become incidents. Audit trails and service account governance extend accountability beyond individual users, and federation simplifies control when managed carefully. When lifecycle management and governance work together, identity becomes a stable foundation for security rather than a constant source of uncertainty. Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.